Hello everyone, welcome to my talk about React Server components in Next.js. This talk is previously held at JogjaJS forum in 28 October 2023. This is me recording again at my home office so everyone can see and enjoy my talk. Hopefully it can be for your benefit. So let me introduce myself. My name is Hanif Utama. I am a senior software engineer and tech lead front-end at Jakpat. I am currently helping Jakpat to migrate its internal dashboard from Laravel plus AngularJS into React plus Next.js. So we want to modernize our technology stack while improving the performance and the robustness of our dashboard. So let me preface my talk with some history. A web server technologies has come a long way. It started with Sir Tim Berners-Lee when he proposed to his office CERN to create a system to make sharing important document easier. So he created HTML and he also created the first server and the first browser to be able to access the HTML documents. The computer that he used to serve those documents are still in display in CEN Museum as displayed on this slide. So that happens 30 years ago in 1993. About 2 years after that, Rasmus Lasdorp created what's called PHP. It's a way to dynamically send response to user requests. So we can modify the response based on who asked the request or what time is it. So we can make a really dynamic application using PHP in the server. But then about 6 months after that, Brendan H. and his team at Mosaic realized that the browser doesn't have any dynamic scripting language yet to be able to make a rich application on the browser. He has envisioned to make some kind of script that is based on from Java, that is a really popular language at the time. So he created something called JavaScript, even though it doesn't have any other connection to Java. CSS is coming about maybe a year after that, so 26 years ago. So it comes a long way, about 30 years ago until now. The HTML, the this web server technology, the clients scripting technology, the CSS to make the this the design better. It's coming a long way until now. And for the past 10 years, we have really experienced an explosion of web application especially be, especially be, especially being pushed by the advancement of the technology in the JavaScript area. JavaScript now is quite different from JavaScript 27 years ago when the Mosaic team invented it. Today, the landscape is so fast that there's so many developers working on it. There's a lot of libraries and frameworks that support it. There's jQuery, there's React. That is arguably now React is the number one library for front end technology. So React is actually a really young technology compared with the other fundamental technology of the web. But in the age of fast advancement of the technology, of web technology, React is actually quite old. 10 years is quite old in the JavaScript age. Every year there's a new framework, every year there's new libraries is coming up and is trying to remove React from its hegemony. So after 10 years of its existence, React has transformed into quite complex software. It has transformed into several different paradigm. Nowadays, React uses a model called Hook that is moving away from class-based components. And one of the changes to React's paradigm now is something that is called React Server Components. And the React Server Component has created a lot of chatters and confusions within the technology sphere. There's a lot of memes and jokes that is coming up from this announcement of React Server Components. One of them is this tweet that I found about how the component on React now it looks like a PHP. So it's like a circle that comes come around from server-based development to the client-based development using the single page application, and then now we come back again to server web development using JavaScript in the server. So it's quite humorous quip, but actually not far from the truth. So before we before I explain what is React Server Components, I think we need to understand first about the React rendering strategies or method that is used by React or the frameworks that use React to render content into browser. The first rendering method that React use, and this is the OG rendering method, the original rendering method is client-side rendering. Client-side rendering basically uh, happens when the user asks for URL contents, and then the server will respond with downloading JavaScript, and then after downloading JavaScript files, it will render the shell, and here we will have the first pane and page interactive. After that, it will call an API resources and it will query database in the server again, and it will return the content to the client. Then the client, the JavaScript script on the client will render the content, and then the content painted. So this is the life cycle of the request in the client side rendering. The rendering happens on the client with the data from the query. As you see, this rendering method has some weakness, which is it needs several back and forth between server and client to be able to render the content. When the first paint and page interactive happen, and when the content painted happen, it will take a long time from the initial request from the server. So the consequences is the user will be waiting quite a long time to be able to see or read the content from the server. So this is the original React. So to come up or to fix the problem of waiting a long time and then the bad SEO because of the waiting and the bad performance of it, the React and the uh, React framework such as NextJS come up with something called server-side rendering. So in server-side rendering, when a user requests a web page, uh, the server will not directly the, uh, give the JavaScript files, but instead it will render the shell first. So it can send the shell to the client. And here already we can see the improvement. The first pane is actually happen after the render shell. The shell is sent to the client. And then after first pane, the shell is there. The user can see the shell. It will download the JavaScript, and then after the JavaScript done downloading, it will use a method called hydration to hydrate the shell that we have using the content from the server. And the server will do database query and so on, and etc. And then the content will be rendered. It actually looks like it's actually similar to how, for example, if we have an empty glasses, if you have an empty glasses, we we want to drink from the glasses, but we don't have any water in it yet. So the hydration is actually we pour the water from the tap, for example, or from the kettle inside our glasses. So the, it has water content in it that we can drink. That's actually uh, how hydration comes from. Hence the name. So here we can see the improvement. But why not we take it further? What if we can access the data? Here we can see the the database query still is the bottleneck here. It needs, when it's hydrating, it needs to go back and forth to the server to get the database query. What if we can move this database query to the initial request processing? So when we render the shell, we can also query the database in the server and then get a really fully formed content into the client in the first place. So this is the idea of server's component. Here we have database query on the server. When user requests a URL, it will do the database query. It will render the app and the first time in the server, and then it will send the JavaScript and the content actually to the client, and then it will hydrate some of the data that needed afterwards. So it's actually the content actually can show up faster than the server side rendering. Some frameworks already have this, including the Node.js based frameworks. So this is React Server Components. But what is React Server Component actually? So server components, we can see the difference here between server components and client component. We can see right away that uh, the the, the most obvious difference is there's a directive here called use client on the client component. It's That's actually because in the new React Server component paradigm, the React and Next.js will treat all component as server component by default. So by default, all the components will be server components unless we add a specific and deliberate client directive, use client directive on the component. If we add use client directive on the component, it will become client component. The other difference that we can see from the server component to client component is server component can import DB and do database connect directly from the component. This is quite astonishing for a long time React developer. A, a React component that can connect to the database directly. It's revolutionary. So this is a helicopter view of this difference between server component and client component. So if we deep dive into the difference, we can see that first server component render only on the server, while client component is actually rendered twice, rendered on the server and then rendered on the client too. Server component is a new kind of component, and client component is actually the component that we already know and love in React. Server component is default component, as I said. Client components needs the use client directive. Server component cannot handle state, but client component, as usual, can use state. And this is the important one. Server component can import client component, but client component can only import client component. So server component can import both server component and client component, but client component cannot import server component. It can only import client component. So okay, that's the difference between server component and client component. So the best way or the easy way to imagine diff, this separation between server component and client component, which component should we use server, which component should we add client into it, is by imagining uh, it like a boundary. This idea comes from Josh Como. Uh, I link it on the slide. Uh, uh, it's helpful if we imagine the client components as a client boundary. So for example, here we have the component tree for the app, and we have header and article and other components below that. We want to make article and components below that as a client. So first, what we do is you add use client into the article. So by using use client on this article component, we actually transform this article component into client component. But the app component and the header component here is stays same as server component. So by adding or by transforming the article component into use client, the consequences is it creates some kind of client boundary that all the other components underneath the article component became a client component. So when we add use client directive on a parent component, we actually don't need to add the use client directive on each of the components beneath them. Like we don't need to add use client on hit counter or discussion, because when we add use client here, all the client command is automatically considered client command by React. So it creates a kind of client boundary here. All the components here and inside the boundary is becoming client boundary thanks to the transformation of the article component into client component. So this is a really easy way to understand it. Okay, so if we know that RRC is standard or the React library, uh, it must be that when it's standard, all the frameworks support it, right? But it turns out, no, NextJS right now is the only framework that offer full support of RRC. And that's really because server components require uh, implementation in the server side from the framework. Because React is a front-end component or a front-end library, it it needs to have a deep collaboration with the frameworks to be able to implement this React server components feature. So to use server components in Next.js, we need to use Next.js version 13.4 plus or above, and also we have to use the app router feature from Next.js. We need to migrate all the pages router from our previous Next.js application into app router, because they cannot because they need to be converted. And the server components is default. uh, I've talked about it before on the previous slide, that all the components is assumed to be server components by default. So we want to consider the server components, right? So what is the pros and the cons? The pros, by implementing the server components, we will have smaller bundle size, because actually the JavaScript that the server sent to the client is less than if we don't use the server components, because we don't need to send something that we will not use in the component and in the component that we use it. So it will be smaller. The rendering will be faster because of the smaller bundle size, and the server is controllable via versus different kind of browser. What I mean by this is there's a lot of browser out there and a lot of version of browser out there. So, and some of them is very old that is not compatible with the React. Sometimes we need to use polyfill, for example. Sometimes we need to use some tricks to be able to conform to the browser. If we use server component, we actually can control the server that we use, so we can mitigate for the compatibility of the browser. The fourth one, the pros, is we can hydrate only what is needed. We don't need to hydrate the thing that we don't need. Can also keep sensitive data on the server, API key, the secrets on for API. We can keep it in the server where it's safe and not send it to the browser. The last one is caching. We can do more aggressive caching on the server components. But what is the cons? The cons for React Server components is, first, we can't use CSS in JS in server components. React Contact also doesn't work on server components. There's also more things to think about. We need to think about how, what components we use, is it server or client, and more work on server. We need to control which part to hydrate. So we know the pros and cons. Now the question is, should I use React Server components in my code or in my app? Uh, I think I recommend yes if you are already deeply invested in React plus Next.js, because Next.js is the only framework that support it. Yes, if you have control of the server. If you don't have control of the server, it's useless. Yes, if performance is very important to you. Yes, if your bundle size is too big. But you shouldn't use it if your life is complex enough already. Why? Because it will add more stuff to think about and more stuff to change on from your code. So be careful before you deep dive into this server components. So uh, if you should you decide to adopt the React server components, I recommend this adoption strategy. First, add the use client directive to the root of your app. So all by doing this, you will transform all the components on your uh, application to be client components. So you don't need to think about server components. Just do or just transform all of your components into client components. So no server components at the beginning. But then, as you slowly do it, you can move the directive, the client directive, as low in the rendering tree as you can. For example, uh, first you can on the app chart that we have before, we can add first the use client into the app components, and then we can move it to the article, and then we can move it to the comments, and we can move it as low as we can. If we cannot put it any lower, that means that's the perfect place for the client directive. And third, adopt advanced patterns only when the performance issues arise. So just do the simple way and only use the advanced patterns when we hit a bottleneck. So that's uh, my presentation about React Server component. Thank you very much for your attention. Bye.